Her chest was on fire, each heartbeat hammering so loud she feared it might give her away. She stumbled over the uneven ground, the soles of her boots scraping against hidden roots, snow crunching beneath them, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced faster than her legs, thoughts colliding with one another like a storm inside her skull. Why me? Why did they turn away? Why did they cast me out like I was nothing? Every word her pack had spat at her echoed in her head, a chorus of rejection she could never erase. Pain lanced through her leg, sharp and unforgiving, but she forced herself to keep moving, driven by something she didn't fully understand. A flicker of heat pulsed beneath her skin, strange and powerful, something alive, dangerous, and hers, something she had spent her entire life hiding. She had always feared it, feared what it could do, feared that it was the reason she had been cast out. And now she wasn't sure whether to be afraid of the world, or of herself. Through the blur of exhaustion and terror she glimpsed it, the barn. A humble, weathered structure, standing alone amid the wilderness, its outline faint but promising, like a single candle in an endless dark. Her heart clenched at the sight. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was hope, fragile but real, a place where she might finally be allowed to breathe. Maybe here she could hide. Maybe here she could survive the night. Yet even as she staggered toward it, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Something in the shadows moved, not carelessly, not like an animal that hunted for hunger, but deliberately, silently. Her chest tightened and a shiver ran through her despite the heat of her adrenaline. She wanted to stop, wanted to hide, wanted to curl up and pray that whatever it was would pass. But she didn't. She couldn't. Pain radiated from her leg, sharp and unrelenting, a reminder of every stumble, every misstep that had brought her to this moment. Her hands shook as she pushed herself upright, gripping her coat like a lifeline. I am not nothing, she told herself, repeating it over and over, a mantra against the fear clawing at her chest. I'm not nothing. I'm not nothing. I'm not nothing. Every nerve in her body screamed. Every shadow seemed alive, waiting for her to falter. But then, just for a heartbeat, she felt something else. A faint recognition. Something primal and undeniable, a thread connecting her to the world she had been told she didn't belong to. Her pulse throbbed, and with it the faint, flickering glow of that hidden power surged, brushing against the edges of her consciousness. It wasn't ready to fully reveal itself, not yet, but it was there, a spark she could no longer ignore. She stumbled forward, breath ragged, knees weak, until she reached the barn door. Her fingers, numb and trembling, fumbled with the latch. It felt heavier than it should, the wood rough under her fingertips, and her chest heaved as exhaustion threatened to pull her down to the cold, hard ground. She wrenched it open, almost falling inside, and for the first time in hours, maybe days, she allowed herself a moment to simply exist. The barn smelled of earth and hay and old wood, of quiet and solitude. It smelled of safety, or at least the closest thing to it she had known in a long time. She sank to the floor, pressed her cheek against the rough timber, and let out a shuddering breath that carried all the fear, all the pain, all the shame she had been running from. But even here, in this fragile sanctuary, she could feel the world pressing in. A low, deliberate growl vibrated through the floorboards, subtle but unmistakable. Her head lifted slowly, eyes scanning the shadows, and she realized that this was no ordinary predator. This was something different, something ancient, something patient, something aware. Her chest tightened again, but this time not only from fear. There was awe tangled with it, curiosity, a spark of something that made her pulse catch in a way she couldn't name. She was not entirely alone. She was being watched, studied perhaps, by a force she did not yet understand. And somehow, somewhere deep in her bones, she knew she was meant to face it. Not with weapons, not with running, but with herself. With the part of her that had always been called too much, that had always burned too brightly. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, cold and sharp, but she let them fall. She was tired, exhausted, broken in ways she had spent a lifetime hiding. But in that exhaustion, a strange clarity settled over her. He was not done. She would survive this night. She would survive herself. And when she emerged, when she faced the world that had rejected her, she would not be what it expected. He would not be small. She would not be silent. She would be fire. And somewhere beyond the shadows, the growl came again, closer this time, patient, waiting, knowing. Her pulse quickened, and she realized that fear and power were not opposites. They were two halves of the same heartbeat. One without the other could not exist. She could feel it stirring beneath her skin, reaching, coaxing her awake. She clenched her fists, teeth gritted, and whispered to herself almost a prayer. I am here. I am alive. I will not be afraid. Her senses sharpened, every nerve alive, attuned to the smallest sound, the faintest shift in shadow, the pulse of life that was not her own. Something waited. Something immense. Something that might be her enemy, or perhaps something she had been searching for all her life without knowing it. She didn't know yet, but she would. And the moment she discovered it, everything would change. If you crave stories that grip your heart and soul, the whisper of danger and the pull of fire inside the human heart, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections. Your next heartbeat awaits. Because out here in the silence between shadows, in the pause before revelation, something is waking, and it will not be denied. She had barely caught her breath when movement in the shadows drew her attention, subtle yet impossible to ignore. At first she thought it might be another creature of the forest, some predator lurking in the corners of her vision, waiting for her to falter. But this was different. There was a weight to it, a deliberate control in the way it moved, silent but purposeful, as if the space itself bent around him. Her chest tightened again, pulse hammering. Her body screamed to run, to hide, to vanish into the safety of the shadows she had claimed as her own. But some primal thread rooted her to the spot, making her stay. Then she saw the eyes. Two glowing, impossibly sharp lights cutting through the dimness, holding her attention captive. They were not human, not entirely, yet neither were they animal. They carried centuries of experience, of observation, of something far older than the forest around them. The way they looked at her was not with hunger or malice, but with curiosity, recognition, and a strange reverence she had never encountered before. Her stomach twisted with a mixture of fear and awe. Her heart beat so fast she thought he could hear it. She couldn't take her eyes off him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but not in the exaggerated, menacing way she had seen in predators before. He moved with a grace that betrayed strength, power held in absolute control, and even in the dim light she could feel it radiating from him like heat from a fire. Every instinct screamed both warning and fascination. She wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of her barn, to the walls she had built for herself. And yet she could not look away. From the corner of her vision, a shadow shifted. A predator, smaller, faster, and cruel in intent, lunged toward her. The reflexive fear in her chest spiked so violently it almost consumed her, but before she could even cry out, he moved. Strong hands caught her wrist, gripping with careful yet undeniable power. He steadied her as she stumbled against him, chest pressed to his, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to the warmth of his body against hers. His other hand was a blur, striking with precision and force that left the attacker crumpled in the shadows. He did not rush. He did not panic. He was in complete control, and that control both terrified and fascinated her. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the steady rhythm of his pulse under her trembling hands. Fear still clung to her chest, and yet there was a thrill, a spark of something she had long forgotten, stirring in its place. Something like hope, something like recognition. His eyes found hers, holding her gaze, assessing, weighing, understanding without a word. He didn't smile, he didn't offer charm or ease. There was no flattery in his expression. There was only truth. And truth, she realized, could be more disarming than any weapon or trick. "You're hurt," he said, low and measured voice carrying weight, authority, and an unexpected warmth. "You shouldn't have come this far alone." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, that she didn't need him, that she could survive without anyone noticing her. But her voice failed her. She could barely manage a whisper. Why are you here?" He studied her carefully, his gaze unflinching, scanning not just the injuries she could see but the tension coiled in every muscle, the way she flinched at the smallest sound, the way she trembled despite herself. There was no judgment in him. Only acknowledgement. Only understanding. "I've been where you are," he said finally, voice quiet but deliberate, as if measuring every word. "Alone. Misunderstood. Rejected. And I know what it feels like to fight for every moment, for every breath, for the chance to simply exist in a world that has decided you are nothing." She felt tears prick her eyes, the kind of tears born not from sorrow alone but from recognition, from the ache of being seen by someone who understood the weight she carried. She blinked quickly, trying to will them back, trying to remind herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could stand alone. But the truth sat heavy on her chest. She wanted him to see her, to understand her, even as fear told her she shouldn't. "You've survived," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Through everything thrown at you. And that counts for more than you realize." Her heart stuttered. The storm she had carried inside herself for so long, the gnawing, relentless ache of being too much, too dangerous, too untamed, he saw it. He saw all of it. Not with judgment, not with fear, not with condescension. He saw her completely in a way she had never allowed anyone to see. I don't know what you mean," she whispered, though even as the words left her lips she felt them faltering, too fragile, too inadequate to describe the tumult inside her. He stepped closer, careful, deliberate, yet his presence filled the space between them. Every nerve in her body screamed both caution and anticipation. She was aware of his height, his breadth, the faint scent of him, earth, and something wild, something that hinted at danger but also at protection. His proximity sent a jolt through her, stirring emotions she had long buried under layers of fear and self-preservation. "You're stronger than you know," he said softly, almost a whisper now, leaning just enough to close the space between them without breaking it. "More dangerous than you understand. That is not a condemnation. It is a warning and a promise." Her pulse raced uncontrollably, fear interlaced with something electric, something she could neither define nor resist. She wanted to step back, to create space, to reassert the fragile walls she had built around herself. But her feet felt rooted to the floor, and her breath caught in her throat as awareness of him, of this impossible presence, overwhelmed her. He reached a hand, not forceful but intentional, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The contact was fleeting, barely more than a whisper of touch, yet it ignited her skin. Every nerve sparked, every thought halted, and the cold she had carried for hours seemed to vanish, replaced by heat, by awareness, by the undeniable pull of him. "You're not alone," he said quietly, eyes never leaving hers. "Not anymore. And whatever comes next, I'll face it with you." Her chest tightened, heart hammering with the weight of his words. Her mind reeled with disbelief and hope interlaced in a dangerous dance. She did not trust him yet, not fully, not completely, but the recognition he gave her, the acknowledgement of her strength and survival, it stirred something inside, a fragile ember of something she had long forgotten. The growl in the shadows, low and deliberate, reminded her that danger had not vanished. But now she no longer felt entirely powerless. She felt a thread, a tether, between herself and this stranger who moved with the grace of power tempered by understanding. He was no ordinary man. He was something else. Something dangerous. Something commanding. And something that, perhaps, could understand the fire within her. She realized she was trembling, but it was no longer solely fear. It was adrenaline, yes. Panic, yes. But also something else, something that made her pulse quicken in ways she had never expected. It was curiosity, fascination, attraction, an unnameable spark that made her aware of every brush of air, every sound, every subtle shift of his body. "I've been watching," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Not to harm you, not to test you, to see what you are capable of." Her lips parted, a sharp intake of breath betraying her. Her mind raced, swirling with disbelief, fascination, and an ache of longing she didn't yet understand. To be seen like that, it was intoxicating. It was terrifying. It was forbidden. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand answers. But words faltered in her throat. He was too much, too powerful, too present, too real. And yet she felt a pull, deeper than curiosity, a connection that tugged at the part of her that had always felt misplaced, always rejected, always alone. "You're not what they told you," he continued, taking a careful step closer. "And neither am I. That is why we understand each other, whether we know it yet or not." Her throat tightened further, a lump forming that made her blink rapidly. She wanted to deny it, to retreat into her walls, to remind herself she could survive alone. But she could not. Not entirely. Because the truth sat heavy and undeniable in her chest. She wanted him here. She wanted his understanding, his presence, his acknowledgement of who she truly was. And more than that, she wanted to survive, not just the night but everything that had brought her here, and perhaps with him she could. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms as she fought the rush of emotion, the heat that threatened to overwhelm her. And yet she did not pull away. She could not. She remained pressed to the wall, breath shallow, pulse pounding, every nerve alive to the subtle tension that stretched between them. "You've survived this far," he said finally, voice soft, measured, intimate. "You can survive what comes next. And I'll be here." Her eyes met his, wide and unguarded. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime she believed, if only for a fleeting moment, that she might not be alone. That she might not be hunted. That she might not be entirely powerless. And somewhere beyond the barn the shadows stirred. The growl came again, closer, deliberate, patient. She did not flinch this time. She only breathed, aware of him, aware of the pull, aware of the thread that had begun to weave itself between them. A fragile, dangerous, electric thread that would not be broken no matter what came next. She realized then that this night, this encounter, this presence, would change her forever. She did not yet understand how. She only knew that she would never be the same again. And as the silence stretched, heavy and full of promise and danger, she understood something vital. She had survived the storm outside, and now she might survive the storm within. She pressed herself against the barn wall, the rough wood biting into her palms, and for a long moment she simply listened. Not to the storm outside, nor to the faint creaks of the building shifting in the wind, but to the echo of her own heartbeat. It thumped so loudly it felt almost physical, a drum of warning, a call to arms, a reminder that she was alive, that she had survived again. But alive was not the same as free. Alive did not mean understood, did not mean safe, and certainly did not mean accepted. And yet, in the brief seconds after the Alpha's presence had settled near her, a sliver of something unfamiliar, something both terrifying and enticing, tugged at her, daring her to breathe, daring her to feel. The memories came unbidden, as memories often did in moments of vulnerability, uninvited but impossible to resist. She was 12 the first time she had been called dangerous. 12, with a heart full of hope and a spark of curiosity she had not yet learned to conceal, standing in the training grounds of her pack. The silver fire had erupted, small, erratic, barely controlled, but it had been enough. Enough to make the elders step back, to make the other children flinch, to make her mother's face tighten with a mixture of fear and sorrow that no child should ever have to see mirrored in the eyes of a parent. "Too much," one of the elders had whispered, voice low, urgent, a tremor of fear barely hidden behind their stern mask. "She cannot be trusted. Her fire, it will burn us all." Her mother had not spoken, not with words. Her eyes had said enough. Disappointment, resignation, and that quiet, lethal kind of sorrow that leaves a wound deeper than any claw. "You should have been born like the others," the look had said. "You should have been ordinary." And from that day forward she had learned the rules of survival in a world that feared her. Hide. Deny. Control. Suppress. And always, always run from the eyes that judged. She pressed her palms harder against the wood, letting the rough splinters bite into her skin, because pain was tangible, controllable, familiar. The memories of ridicule and exile were not. They clawed at her, gnawed at the edges of her mind, sharp and unrelenting. She remembered the sneers of her peers, the way they had circled her like wolves themselves, taunting the flickers of silver flame that had danced along her fingertips when fear or anger spiked. The cursed one. The dangerous girl. She will bring ruin. They had called her names meant to wound, meant to isolate, meant to convince her she was unworthy of even the air she breathed. And it had worked in part. She had learned to hide, to vanish when necessary, to become small in a world that demanded conformity. But hiding did not erase her. It did not erase the fire that pulsed through her veins, that shimmered faintly along her skin in moments of high emotion, that marked her as someone other, someone extraordinary, someone feared. She had inherited it, or perhaps it had chosen her, a legacy she barely understood, marked by silver flames, forbidden shifts, and the faint ancient sigil that pulsed along her wrist, invisible to the untrained eye, alive with a power she had yet to fully control. That mark had been a secret she carried like a weight in her chest, and the knowledge of it, combined with the memories of rejection, had forged in her a fortress of caution. Every instinct demanded caution. Every instinct demanded secrecy. And yet, every instinct now also whispered that the Alpha, the stranger who had appeared from the storm like something out of legend, might see her differently. He had not flinched. Not at the faint flicker of silver light that danced along her skin. Not at the mark that pulsed faintly beneath her sleeve. He had only looked, truly looked, with eyes that measured, that weighed, that understood more than any gaze had dared to understand before. And it unsettled her in ways she could not articulate, making her pulse quicken, making her breath shallow, making the barn feel simultaneously suffocating and infinite. Her thoughts drifted back again to the nights of exile, the long stretches of time spent moving through forests where no path existed, where no other soul lingered. She had learned to listen to the wind, to read the patterns of the snow, to interpret the subtle rustle of branches and the faintest movement in the shadows. Every step had been a negotiation with survival itself. Hunger had gnawed at her. Cold had cut through her bones. Wolves she did not know, the truly wild ones, had stalked her in silence, testing her. And yet she had endured. She had survived, carrying with her the shame, the fear, and the fire that no one had ever understood. Her mind lingered on the Pack's council, the night they had finally exiled her, a formal ceremony in the hall that had been cold and echoing, where elders had circled her like vultures and spoken words meant to cut deep. Renounce your power. Deny yourself. Be ordinary. And when she had refused, when she had stood trembling and furious, refusing to betray what she had been born to wield, they had cast her out. The echoes of their condemnation had chased her through the forests, over frozen rivers, into the barren landscapes that had been her only home for months. Every step had been a reminder of their rejection, every night alone beneath the stars a testament to her isolation. And yet, through every hardship, through every wound, through every cruel whisper, the ember inside her refused to die. It whispered that she was more than the Pack, more than the condemnation, more than the fear they tried to instill. It whispered that she carried power that could not be erased, that fire that could not be tamed by others' expectations, that legacy that belonged to her alone. It was a dangerous thought, a forbidden hope, but hope nonetheless. Her attention shifted to the Alpha again. Even here, in the shadows, in the frozen silence of the barn, his presence anchored her. He had saved her. Not perfectly, not without threat, but he had intervened when she could not defend herself. And more than that, he had done so without fear, without judgment, without recoil. He had merely seen her. And in that seeing she felt the faintest spark of something she had long forgotten: connection, recognition, understanding. Could anyone ever truly understand her? She had spent years wondering if anyone could endure the weight she carried, the power she bore, the danger she represented. And now, as she watched him, as she felt the lingering warmth of his proximity, as she registered the subtle confidence in his movements, she dared to imagine that perhaps someone could. Perhaps he could. Her thoughts wandered to her power again, the silver flame that had erupted in her youth, the forbidden shifts she had practiced in secret, the faint ancestral mark pulsing along her wrist. They were not merely tools or tricks. They were extensions of herself, manifestations of something ancient, dangerous, and undeniable. She had been taught to hide them, to fear them, to believe they were too much for the world to bear. And yet, in the presence of the Alpha, she did not feel the same compulsion to conceal. Perhaps it was the way he had looked at her, the way he had allowed her to exist fully in that space without recoil. Perhaps it was something deeper, an unspoken understanding that he too carried shadows, that he too had endured and survived. Her pulse quickened as memories of control and failure mingled with a strange, forbidden thrill. She had learned to shape the flame, to restrain it, to control the shifts, but always in secret, always in fear of discovery. And now, sitting in the barn, alone but for the presence of someone who might understand, she felt a stirring, a pull toward embracing what she had long denied herself. Not fully, not recklessly, but tentatively, cautiously, as if testing the boundaries of a world that had never accepted her. Her mind returned to the night she had first shifted. Alone in the forest, beneath a sky so wide and cold it made her bones ache, she had allowed herself to become something more than human. Her senses had sharpened, her vision had changed, her strength had grown, and for the first time she had felt free, unbound, powerful. And yet, when she returned to herself, trembling and raw, the weight of the world had pressed down again, reminding her that she was never truly free, that she could never be fully understood, that she was always dangerous, always different, always other. And now here the Alpha stood as a silent witness to her truth. His eyes did not waver. His stance did not falter. He did not flinch. And in that she found a thread, delicate but unbroken, that tethered her hope to something outside herself. She traced her fingers over the faint mark again, feeling the pulse beneath her skin, the ancient rhythm that had been with her since birth, whispering secrets she had not yet unlocked. And she realized with a shiver that perhaps survival was no longer just about enduring the storm outside. Perhaps survival was about understanding, about connection, about finding someone who could see the fire within and not fear it. Her thoughts drifted inevitably to him. The stranger, the alpha, the man who had appeared from the storm and into her life with the quiet certainty of power and understanding. She did not trust him fully, not yet. She could not. But she felt something stirring in her chest, something raw and fragile, something that whispered, maybe he could understand. Maybe he could see all of me. Maybe I could allow myself to hope. And for the first time in a long time, hope felt dangerous. Because hope always carried the risk of heartbreak. Because hope always demanded courage. Because hope, sometimes, was the only thing worth surviving for. She followed him through the darkened forest, each step cautious yet compelled, as though the snow-laden earth beneath her boots knew the path better than her own instincts. The moonlight filtered through the skeletal branches, catching in the frost, scattering shards of silver across the ground like shattered promises and unspoken truths. Every gust of wind carried with it a scent she could not place. Earth, rain, pine, and something older, something ancient, something waiting. Her chest ached with a strange mixture of fear and anticipation, and she realized she had not dared to feel anticipation in years. Fear, yes. Anger, yes. Pain, yes. Survival, endlessly. But anticipation, hope, that had been a luxury forbidden to her. He led her with deliberate steps, his presence a constant beside her, neither looming nor distant, a careful balance she had not known she craved until now. Every so often she would glance at him, catching the angle of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes, and the faint luminescence that hinted at the power simmering beneath his skin. There was no judgment there, no condescension, only recognition. Recognition that both terrified and drew her in with equal force. She wanted to speak, to ask where they were going, what he hoped she would find, but the words lodged themselves in her throat. Instead, she let her senses open, letting the forest speak to her, letting the subtle thrum of energy beneath the snow and frost resonate through her body. The grove revealed itself gradually, at first a suggestion of space, then openness, then impossibly breathtaking clarity. Trees older than memory rose like silent sentinels, their trunks thick and gnarled, bark etched with sigils that hummed faintly in the quiet night air. The snow on their branches shimmered, reflecting not only the moonlight but a faint, otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from the grove itself. The air was alive with a resonance she could feel in her chest, a vibration that made her fingers tingle and the mark along her wrist pulse in quiet, deliberate rhythm. It was as if the world itself had taken a breath in anticipation, as if every leaf, stone, and shadow knew she had come. She stopped at the edge of a natural clearing, taking a hesitant step forward, and froze. The ground before her was ringed with stones, some small, some massive, their surfaces etched with glowing runes that pulsed faintly, shifting as though alive, responding to her presence in ways she could not yet understand. Silver markings traced patterns along the bark of the oldest trees, curling like smoke or liquid, symbols that whispered in a language she had never learned but somehow recognized. The hairs along her arms rose, the wind catching at the loose strands of hair around her face, and her breath came shallow and fast as all mingled with a trembling, gnawing fear. The one with the mark. His voice came then, low, reverent, threading through the grove and weaving around her like a tangible force. She jumped slightly, startled by the sudden intimacy of his presence, though she had known he had been close all along. The child of the flame. The Omega who will lead the lost pack. They spoke your name before you knew how to speak it yourself, long before the fires in your veins were strong enough to be tamed, long before your ancestors imagined your awakening. Her throat tightened. I don't understand. Why me? I'm just. Her words faltered as she raised her gaze to the runes, to the symbols, to the faint shimmer that hovered in the air like spirits circling, moving in patterns she could not yet decipher. Owls, foxes, wolves. She realized with a sudden, unsettling awareness that these forms were watching her, observing her, bowing and curving through the night air as if drawn by her presence alone. I'm not ready, she whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. He stepped closer, careful but unmistakably present, grounding her in a way that both comforted and unnerved her. Readiness is a construct, he said, voice calm yet heavy with the weight of inevitability. You are who you are and you have always carried this within you. The world may not have been ready, the pack may not have been ready, but you have always been meant to awaken, even if the awakening terrifies you. Her eyes dropped to the mark on her wrist. It pulsed stronger now, responding to the energy of the grove, to the pull of the prophecy, to the unseen, circling spirits above. It had always been a secret she had carried alone, something both precious and dangerous, and now it was alive in ways she could no longer deny. Fear pressed at her chest, sharp and insistent, warning her of the consequences of embracing what she had long concealed. Yet beneath it there was awe, a thrill so pure it took her breath away, and a trembling, forbidden curiosity. What if I fail? She asked finally, voice quivering, almost drowned by the soft hum of power that permeated the grove. What if I can't handle it? What if I bring ruin like they always said? He studied her, expression inscrutable, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then you will rise again. That is what those before you could not comprehend. Power is not perfection and destiny is not a straight path. It is forged in struggle, tempered in fire and defined by courage. You have already survived what few could endure, and that is only the beginning. The wind stirred in the clearing, brushing through the branches, sending a shower of frost like tiny diamonds cascading around her. The spirits in the air above shifted, forming patterns she could not interpret, yet felt in every fiber of her being. A language older than memory, older than the pack, older than her own life, speaking to her in pulses, in rhythms, in silent, undeniable insistence. She took a hesitant step closer to the center of the circle of stones. The Alpha did not move to stop her. Instead he watched, protective yet distant, a presence that reassured without enclosing, that offered strength without claiming control. Every instinct in her body screamed both warning and invitation. He could not stop herself. She needed to touch it, to feel it, to let it acknowledge her presence fully. Her fingers grazed the surface of one of the larger stones. It was impossibly cold, yet warmth radiated from within it, a warmth that seeped into her hands, her arms, her chest, until she could feel it coursing through her veins. The mark on her wrist flared, silver light spilling outward in gentle arcs, coiling like liquid fire, tracing patterns she had only glimpsed in dreams. She gasped, stepping back slightly, but the sensation was not frightening. It was awakening, clarifying, affirming. The world around her had shifted imperceptibly. She was no longer alone in her power, no longer merely the exile, the dangerous one, the Omega cast out. She was part of something greater, something ancient, something that had been waiting for her all along. The prophecies, she whispered, voice trembling. The stories, they spoke of me? Yes, he said, voice steady, anchored, unwavering. They spoke of the one who would rise from exile, who would carry the flame that could unite or destroy, who would lead the lost and bring balance where fear had fractured the world. That child, that Omega, it has always been you. Her pulse raced, a flood of emotion crashing over her. Awe, fear, exhilaration, terror, and something tender, fragile, almost shocking in its intensity, hope. Hope that she could finally be seen, hope that she could finally be understood, hope that she might not always be hunted or feared. And in that fragile hope, a single daring thought slipped through. Perhaps I am not alone. The spirits above swirled faster, responding to her recognition, their movements almost joyful in their celebration of her awakening. Silver light danced in the snow around her boots, in the frost on the stones, and along the tendrils of her mark, shimmering like a river of fire threading through her veins. She could feel the pull of the prophecy pressing against her heart, a weight at once terrifying and exhilarating, a call to embrace the very destiny she had fled from all her life. He remained quiet, letting her feel it, letting her confront it herself. He did not speak words of encouragement. He offered only presence, strength, and the faintest trace of a promise in the curve of his eyes and the set of his shoulders. Protective yet distant, watching her awaken while holding himself slightly apart. A reminder that even in this newfound clarity, there were boundaries, there were trials, there were dangers yet to face. Her knees felt weak, yet she did not fall. She allowed herself to breathe in the cold, to feel the pulse of energy around her, to register the enormity of what she had discovered. The mark, the fire, the prophecy, all of it was hers, and yet it was not just hers. It belonged to the grove, to the spirits, to the forest, to the unseen forces that had guided her steps since birth. She was part of a greater tapestry, a story far older and larger than any rejection, any exile, any fear she had carried. And still, beneath the awe and the wonder, there was fear. Fear that she would fail, that the power might overwhelm her, that the world, the pack, the alpha himself might turn against her once she had fully claimed it. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling her heartbeat, the pulse of the mark and the faint echo of the fire in her veins. I can do this, she thought. I have survived worse. I can survive this too. He stepped closer then, a single deliberate movement, and she felt the warmth radiate from him, grounding her even as the prophecy surged within her. You are ready, he said softly, voice threading through the night like a spell. Not because the world is ready for you. Not because the prophecy demands perfection. But because you have endured and because now you are awake. She looked up at him, eyes wide, breath trembling, heart hammering in the cold night. I don't know what comes next. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know this, you will not face it alone. And whatever the world demands, whatever the prophecy asks, whatever dangers rise, we will meet them. Together if you choose it. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of exhilaration, terror and fragile, impossible hope threading through her chest. Together. The word echoed like a promise, a challenge, a lifeline. And in the center of the grove, beneath the moonlight, among the whispering stones, the circling spirits and the silver glow of her mark, she realized. She was ready to step into what she had always feared and longed for. To embrace her destiny. To awaken fully. And perhaps in doing so she might finally find a place where survival was not just about enduring storms or escaping fear. Perhaps she might finally find a place where she could belong. The forest was alive with tension before the first sound even reached her ears. Something shifted in the air, a vibration that set her teeth on edge, that made her pulse spike and every muscle in her body tighten like a coiled spring. The snow beneath her boots was suddenly too soft, too yielding, as if it had been laid over hidden dangers. She felt it first in her gut, a warning ancient and primal, a tremor through the soles of her feet that whispered of predators, rivals and shadows older than memory. The alpha moved at her side, silent, deliberate, his presence both anchor and warning. He did not speak, and yet his eyes, their glint barely catching the moonlight, conveyed everything she needed to know. Stay sharp. Be ready. Trust nothing, not even the wind. Then a sound, low, guttural, almost a growl but layered with intelligence, slithered through the grove. It came from the tree-line, deep where shadows pooled like spilled ink, and her heart lurched violently. She had learned to read danger in instinct, in the subtle twitch of a branch, in the way a shadow moved against the snow. And now the forest itself seemed to recoil as if anticipating violence. Before she could even process the shapes, they erupted from the darkness. Wolves. No, not ordinary wolves. Shadows darker than night, eyes glowing faint red in the gloom, claws scraping the frozen earth with horrifying precision. They moved in coordination, predatory and relentless, a pack without mercy, their growls threading through the wind in a low, hypnotic chant that made her teeth chatter. She stumbled backward, her hands gripping the rough stone of the grove, but the instinct to fight flickered through her, primal and undeniable. Her pulse thundered, her lungs burned, but she could not flee, not yet. The alpha stepped in front of her, broad and immovable, the tension radiating from his stance almost visible in the night air. The shadow beasts circled, waiting, calculating, and for a heartbeat the world seemed suspended, frozen between breath and violence. Then one lunged. She reacted without thinking, the silver flame igniting along her forearm like a living thing, tendrils of light coiling and snapping outward. The nearest shadow wolf yelped, its momentum thrown off by the unexpected heat, smoke curling around its fur as the flame struck. Her eyes widened in shock at the power, the control only partially hers yet immediate, instinctual. The mark along her wrist pulsed furiously, as though cheering her, as though calling to her deeper strength. The alpha moved with fluid precision, intercepting a second attacker, his hand catching the beast mid-leap, claws raking the snow but never touching her. The sheer force of him radiated protection, and for a moment her fear twisted into awe. The predators were relentless, but so was he, a shield she did not yet know how to repay. And then the voices came. Not from the beasts, not yet. Human voices, sharp and taunting, cutting through the chaos. "The cursed Omega," one yelled, the words carrying both fear and disdain. "She brings ruin wherever she steps. Do not let her touch the pack." Another voice, sharp and accusing, "Her flames are unnatural. She will burn us all." The words were familiar, haunting echoes of her past, each syllable striking her like a physical blow. Rage flared alongside fear, and the silver flame responded, licking higher along her arm, brightening as if fed by the insult and accusation. "Control it," the Alpha snapped, though his voice carried a tremor of his own rising alarm. He caught her gaze, those storm-dark eyes piercing hers with a demand that was both caution and command. She could not falter. Not now. Not while the forest trembled and shadows lunged and human voices attacked her as much as the beasts themselves. Her muscles coiled, her senses sharpened beyond what she thought possible. She struck out, the flame lashing in arcs, the energy spilling like a ribbon of silver lightning across the grove. Each strike was precise, defensive, yet powerful enough to make the shadow wolves falter. One lunged too close and yelped as the silver light burned along its flank, smoke curling into the frosty air. Another backed away, snarling, confused by the force she wielded without full mastery. The Alpha moved with her, a whirlwind of motion, claws striking, strength colliding with the night, every movement a dance of protection and command. Yet even as he defended her, she noticed the hesitation flicker in his eyes, the split between duty and desire. The pack that had always bound him called him in one direction, loyalty demanding compliance, and yet his gaze remained on her, calculating, weighing, wanting to protect. She felt the tension between them like a tangible cord, taut and electric, connecting their movements even as they fought on separate fronts. Then a human figure emerged from the shadows, one of the dissenters from the old pack, face twisted in scorn and fear. He carried a blade tipped with some dark alloy, pulsing faintly in the moonlight. "Step back, Alpha," he called. "This is not her fight. She is a danger to us all." Her chest tightened. The words echoed too closely to her childhood, to the endless litany of rejection and accusation. Rage coiled in her stomach, fueling her power. The flame along her wrist flared violently, tendrils whipping outward, and she felt the control slip momentarily, the danger of her own force pressing against her mind. He could burn them all. He could end it here. And for a flickering instant the thought tempted her, almost whispered in exhilaration. The Alpha's hand shot out, gripping her shoulder, grounding her. "No," he barked, voice slicing through her fury. "Not here. Not like this." His touch sent a jolt through her body, equal parts fire and ice, control and surrender. His eyes locked on hers, not judging, not commanding, but warning, guiding, tethering. And she realized that the fight was not just against the shadows or the pack. It was against herself, against the danger of losing herself to the very power that had both cursed and defined her. One of the shadow wolves leapt from the edge of the grove, massive and snarling. She ducked instinctively, but the movement threw her off balance. Snow sprayed across her boots, her hands scraped the ice, and panic surged. The Alpha intercepted the beast with inhuman strength, claws tearing through its shoulder as he rolled it away from her. The silver flame arced again, controlled, defensive, and she realized with a jolt that she could guide it, shape it, wield it in tandem with his movements. Yet even as the immediate danger passed, the emotional weight pressed heavier than any physical threat. The human voices, the accusations, the fear, the flash of power uncontrolled, it all pressed against her heart. She knew instinctively that staying meant risking more than her life. She could burn, she could hurt, she could unleash a power that none of them could survive if her control faltered. He saw it too. The hesitation flickered in his gaze, a storm of conflicting loyalties. Pack versus the bond forming between them, duty versus the instinct to protect. He wanted to pull her back, to insist she leave, but his lips remained sealed, his jaw tight, because he understood the cost if she ran blindly. And so the clash continued, an unholy ballet of claws and flames, shadows and human voices, every strike an echo of her past, every dodge a test of her emerging power. The forest groaned beneath the weight of unleashed forces, the snow churned underfoot, and the wind itself carried the sense of fear, blood, and fire. Finally, with a growl that was part frustration, part command, she stepped back, retreating instinctively toward the barn that had become her refuge. The alpha did not follow immediately, holding off the shadow wolves with strikes precise and deadly, allowing her the space to withdraw. Each movement was deliberate, teaching her through action, guiding her without words, tethering her to the fight even as she fled. She reached the barn, throwing the door open with a strength born of desperation, and slammed it shut behind her. Heart hammering, lungs burning, body trembling, she pressed her back against the wall again, listening to the chaos outside. Claws scraped against wood, growls echoed in the frozen night, human voices shouted, but she was safe, barely temporarily. Her hands were shaking, black soot and silver residue clinging to her skin, yet her mind was clear. She had survived. She had fought. And she had learned more about the power within her than she had ever known in solitude. But she also knew the truth she could not escape. This was only the beginning. The world would not welcome her awakening. The pack would not forgive her power. And the alpha, he would have to choose where his loyalties lay. She sank to the floor of the barn, pressing her palms into the splintered wood, and whispered to herself, voice ragged but resolute, "I will return. Stronger. Better. And next time, they will understand. Or they will regret standing in my way." Outside, the storm of the night continued, but inside her fire had been tempered, honed, and ignited in ways that no exile, no shadow, no pack could ever undo. The world had thrown its first challenge and she had survived it, though she knew with a heartbeat that echoed in her chest, that the real war was only just beginning. The barn was silent now, save for the soft groan of timber settling and the occasional sigh of wind through the broken gaps in the roof. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only a hush over the snow-laden fields. Moonlight filtered in through the slats, pale and ethereal, touching the frost-covered floorboards and illuminating the scattered hay in delicate silver threads. It was the kind of night that demanded quiet, that required listening, not to the world but to oneself. She sat huddled near the corner, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around herself as if her own embrace could shield her from the weight of the past and the tension of the night's clash. Around the barn, the wolves lay curled like sentinels, their eyes closed but their ears twitching, alert even in repose. Their presence was reassuring, a soft, constant reminder that she was not completely alone in the world. Yet even with them she felt exposed, vulnerable, not just to the outside dangers, but to the stranger who had risked himself to protect her, who now lingered near the entrance of the barn, silent, tense, and impossibly magnetic. He did not speak at first. He simply watched her, shadowed in the dim light, muscles relaxed yet taut with potential energy. The air between them vibrated, heavy with unspoken words, questions neither had dared to voice. Her pulse, still fast from the previous battle, seemed to slow in response to his calm. There was something in the steadiness of him, something that implied control not over the fire outside, but over the chaos within himself, and perhaps over her own storm of doubt and fear. Finally, he took a step closer, the soft crunch of hay beneath his boots the only sound accompanying his movement. "You fought well tonight," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, carrying both admiration and concern. She swallowed, not trusting herself to speak, and only nodded slightly, feeling the heat in her chest rise, not from shame nor pride, but from something she had long denied herself: being seen, being acknowledged, being understood without judgment. He crouched a few feet away, resting his arms on his knees, his gaze fixed on the dimly glowing runes of frost on the floor, as if measuring them, counting their lines, weighing the night's events in silence. "I know why you hide," he said after a long pause, his voice soft but firm, carrying a weight that made her pulse jump. "I know the exile, the whispers, the fear they taught you to carry. And I know, it doesn't belong to you." The words hit her like a hand pressed against her chest. The fire inside, the one that had been tempered by years of rejection and fear, flickered in response, dangerous and hesitant. She had spent her life alone, shaping her flame in secret, hiding her power from a world that had feared it, fearing herself at times almost as much as she feared the pack that had condemned her. To hear someone, this stranger, this alpha, this man whose presence filled the barn without speaking more than a sentence, acknowledge the weight of it without flinching, it was terrifying and intoxicating all at once. She shifted, trying to find a position that would hide the tremor in her hands, the tension that had not left her body even as the wolves slept. "It's not just hiding," she murmured, voice barely audible, trembling. "Control. Fear of losing myself. Fear of what I could do if I'm not careful. She dared not look at him, afraid that the vulnerability in her tone would betray more than she intended. Yet in the dim moonlight she felt him leaning just slightly closer, a subtle bridge spanning the gap between caution and trust. "I've seen you," he said quietly, eyes finally lifting to meet hers, and in that gaze she felt the weight of centuries, of battles, of wounds both visible and invisible. "I've watched you survive storms you shouldn't have. I've seen the flame in your hands, the mark you've carried in secret, the danger and brilliance intertwined in every movement you make. And I see you. All of you." Her breath caught. All of her. The thought was almost absurd, an impossibility, but the sincerity in his eyes, the absence of fear, the absence of recoil, made her ache with longing she had buried long ago. She wanted to reach for him, to test the reality of his words, to feel the truth of them against her skin. Yet the ghosts of the past whispered, warning her not to trust, not to hope, not to allow herself to be seen in such a raw and exposed way. You don't know what it means," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly as it fought against the tightness in her throat. "To carry this power. To be called dangerous. To walk alone for years because no one could bear to be near what I am." She clenched her fists, feeling the tiny burn of her flame along her skin, flickering faintly like a heartbeat. "I could hurt anyone. Even you." He smiled faintly, but it was not the warm, easy smile of someone at leisure. It was deliberate, tempered with experience, understanding, and an unspoken warning. "I know," he said simply, leaning forward, the shadows casting lines across his face, making him appear both terrifying and beautiful. "And yet you didn't. Not tonight. You didn't lose control. You protected, you defended, and even in the fire you were precise. You can wield this without destroying yourself. Or others. You just need to trust yourself. And me." Trust. The word landed heavy, almost unbearable, but also electric. She had learned to rely only on herself, to fear reliance, to mistrust anyone who offered help, protection, or companionship. And yet here he was, offering not commands or judgment, but an invitation. Trust or leave. Trust or let this moment pass forever. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she considered it, weighted against years of exile and pain, and against the intoxicating pull she felt toward him, toward the warmth that radiated from his presence. The wolves stirred slightly, ears twitching at some distant sound. A chorus of howls carried faintly across the snow, reminders that the world beyond the barn had not paused, had not forgiven, and that danger remained. Yet inside, in the fragile cocoon of warm hay and moonlight, something else pressed against her ribs. Possibility. Something unspoken, delicate yet urgent, that whispered she could survive more than the storms outside. She could survive connection, intimacy, trust. He shifted closer, and this time she did not retreat. His hand hovered just above hers, almost a question, almost a promise, almost a threat. The space between them was charged, a thin veil trembling with electricity, with unvoiced words, with possibilities too raw to name. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire, and she imagined pressing against it, letting herself be seen fully, letting herself be known. The moonlight caught his eyes as he spoke again, voice low, almost a whisper. "You are not alone. You have never been alone. You've been carrying the weight, yes, but it is not yours alone to bear anymore. Let me see you, truly see you. Let me stand with you, if you can allow it." Her pulse fluttered violently. All her defenses, all her careful walls, seemed to quake at once. The flame along her wrist leapt higher, dancing with anticipation, reflecting the storm inside her. Could she trust him? Could she dare? Every fiber in her being screamed caution, yet another part, the part that had longed for understanding, for connection, for the rare touch of acknowledgement, trembled in desire. She shifted slightly, leaning forward, drawn by gravity she had not felt in years, drawn by the sound of his voice, drawn by the dangerous promise of being seen. And he mirrored her motion, closing the gap almost imperceptibly, the air between them pulsing with shared anticipation. Their breaths mingled faintly in the cold barn, and for a suspended heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to the space between their faces, the tension of unspoken words, the tremor of hands not yet touching. And then, as if the universe refused the completeness of the moment, a distant howl broke through the silence, piercing and mournful. She flinched, her spell of intimacy shattered, the world rushing back in with cold, unforgiving clarity. The alpha froze as well, eyes darting toward the shadows, muscles tensing with the old vigilance, the unyielding responsibility that always shadowed him. The moment ended, fragile and suspended, leaving only the echo of what could have been. The almost kiss, the almost trust, the almost confession. Her hands trembled as she pulled them back into her lap, wrapping her arms around herself once more. She met his gaze briefly, searching, hoping for reassurance, for the words to carry her back into that fragile, suspended connection. And he spoke, voice low, steady, unwavering. "I see you, all of you. Every mark, every fear, every flicker of fire. And I am not afraid. Not of you. Not of this. Not of the storm inside or out." The words were soft but unshakable, a tether to something she had not known she still craved. A place to land, someone to rely on, someone who did not recoil at the truth of her existence. For the first time in a long time, hope stirred again, dangerous, fragile, exhilarating hope. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension in her shoulders ease fractionally, and for a moment, the wolves stirred in contentment. The moonlight bathed the barn in quiet luminescence, and the world felt suspended between danger and desire, between isolation and connection. And in that moment she understood. The storm outside was not the only one she would have to endure. There would be battles of fire, of trust, of vulnerability yet to come. But for now, in the fragile quiet of the barn, with the alpha watching, waiting and understanding, she allowed herself to lean. Not into him, not fully, not yet, but into the possibility of being seen, of being understood, of being not alone. And that, she realized, was its own kind of power. The calm she had felt in the barn, that fragile tether to hope and connection, shattered before she even realized it had existed. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, elongating like fingers, and the soft rustle of the wolf's fur became a whispering warning in her ears. She had sensed danger before, but this was different. This was the kind of betrayal that left no time to prepare, no time to guard the heart that had dared to trust. It began with a sound, subtle at first, the low hum of voices carrying across the snow-laden field, muttering words she did not yet recognize. She stiffened, ears straining, body tensing with the first prickle of unease. Then the words became clearer, slicing through the dim light of the barn like knives forged from frost. "The Omega, the cursed one, her power will destroy us." Her breath caught in her throat. Those words, those venom-laden syllables, were not whispered in fear. They were proclaimed with certainty, with judgment, with the cold cruelty of people who had always waited for a moment to strike. Her heart hammered, chest tightening as recognition dawned. Someone had found her. Someone had revealed her identity, exposed the secrets she had guarded so fiercely, the powers she had concealed behind years of exile and quiet endurance. The sensation of being watched, of being hunted, was immediate. Every instinct, honed through years of running, screamed at her to vanish, to disappear into the shadows, to become nothing so that nothing could touch her. But she could not move, could not speak, could not even fully breathe. It was as if the barn itself had grown heavier, the walls closing in, the air turning thick with accusation and judgment. The wolves shifted, low growls vibrating in their throats, sensing the danger before she fully processed it. Their eyes gleamed in the moonlight, bright orbs of loyalty and caution, but even their presence could not shield her from the weight of what was happening. The pack that had once condemned her, was here in spirit, in voice, in accusation. The council's words echoed in her mind as if summoned anew. Renounce your power. Deny yourself. Be ordinary. Or leave. And now those words were no longer distant. They were real, immediate, unstoppable. She tried to speak, tried to protest, tried to claim the space she had fought so hard to protect, but her voice cracked, raw and trembling. I didn't. The words died on her lips as a figure materialized in the doorway, draped in shadow, face hidden but presence undeniable. The villain, the one who had followed, who had watched, who had whispered poison into the ears of those who feared her, stepped into the dim light. "You think you can hide," the figure said, voice silk over steel, calm but loaded with malice. "They need to know who you are. They need to fear you. They need to understand the danger of allowing you to live among them." The words, intended to wound, struck deeper than any blade. She felt the ember of fire inside her flare, silver threads igniting along her veins, dancing beneath her skin, responding to the injustice, to the fear, to the betrayal. The mark along her wrist pulsed violently, a heartbeat of ancient power, a rhythm she had barely dared to acknowledge until now. It called to her, screamed for recognition, demanded action, and yet, every instinct urged caution. Her eyes met his, the alpha's, just across the barn. He stood frozen, jaw tight, muscles coiled with a tension that betrayed his inner struggle. His gaze flickered between her and the intruder, torn between the rules of his pack, loyalty to his people, and the undeniable bond that had begun to form between them. She saw it in his eyes, the hesitation, the conflict, the fear that acting to protect her could unleash consequences neither of them had yet imagined. The intruder moved closer, reveling in the tension, and with a voice loud enough for the snow to carry it across the fields, he revealed the truth to the world outside the barn. She is the Omega they whispered about, the one with the silver flame, the one who carries the mark of the ancestors. Her power will destroy us. She is not to be trusted. She is not to be allowed to exist among the pack. The accusation rippled through the night like an invisible shockwave. Outside, distant howls answered the claim, some of fear, some of excitement, some of primal recognition. The wolves in the barn tensed, their hackles rising as if they could sense the weight of the proclamation, as if they understood that the world had changed in an instant. Her body moved on instinct, a mixture of fury and fear coursing through her veins. Silver flames licked along her skin, tendrils of light and heat that shimmered and danced across her shoulders, her arms, her chest. The mark on her wrist flared, glowing with a fierce luminescence, as if the ancestors themselves had stirred in indignation at the injustice, at the betrayal, at the exposure of their chosen. She rose to her feet, trembling with rage, with hurt, with disbelief. Every instinct screamed at her to strike, to unleash the power she had carefully tempered, to make them see the price of their betrayal. But she hesitated, torn between the need for revenge, the desire to protect the innocent wolves that circled the barn, and the knowledge that once released her full power could not be contained, not fully, not yet. The Alpha took a cautious step forward, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You don't have to do this alone. Let me." His words faltered as his eyes scanned the encroaching shadows, the approaching figures of rival packs drawn by rumor and scent, lured by fear and bloodlust. He hesitated, torn between the bonds of loyalty to his pack and the raw, dangerous connection he had formed with her. The villain smirked, sensing the hesitation, and it was a knife twisting in the wound of trust. "Even he knows," the intruder said, voice dripping with mockery. "Even your so-called protector hesitates. He wonders if it's too dangerous, if you're too much, if you will destroy everything he has tried to protect." The words ignited the final spark of fury inside her. Her silver flame surged, climbing higher along her arms, enveloping her in a spectral glow that reflected the moonlight through the barn. The mark on her wrist blazed like a living sigil, ancient and luminous, burning with the fire of a lineage long hidden from the world. Her hair lifted slightly in the surge of energy, the aura of power surrounding her like a storm, palpable and terrifying. She took a step forward, voice rising over the wind that had begun to stir again outside. "You've all underestimated me for years. You've whispered, you've judged, you've condemned, and yet here I stand." Her words echoed through the barn, carried by the trembling walls, the rustling hay and the watchful eyes of the wolves. "I am not what you fear. I am not what you think you know. And if you think my fire will destroy the world, you are only proving how blind you truly are." The Alpha's gaze softened, but tension still coiled in his posture. He had known her, seen her strength, recognized her potential, and yet even he had not anticipated the full eruption of power now spilling from her being. There was awe there, and fear, and a restrained respect, the kind that made her chest ache with both exhilaration and isolation. The intruder faltered, caught off guard by the sudden display. His confidence, built on manipulation and rumor, wavered in the presence of what she truly was. The rivals gathered outside, drawn by the whispers of the villain, sensed the shift in the air, the weight of a power that could not be contained by their assumptions, and hesitated in fear. Even the council members, distant but aware, would later speak of this night in hushed tones, recounting the moment when the Omega's fire had revealed itself in a blaze of ancestral wrath. But she could not stop. She had to flee. Not because she was afraid of them, though fear licked at the edges of her mind, but because the storm inside her demanded freedom, and because the alpha could not yet follow without risking everything. She needed to move, to breathe, to channel the energy coursing through her into survival rather than destruction. Her gaze met his one last time, filled with the silent plea of trust and the acknowledgement of betrayal. He stepped forward, hand raised, and in that moment, the world seemed to tilt between them, suspended in the fragile thread of connection that had been both ignited and threatened in the span of a heartbeat. And then, with a burst of silver flame and a heartbeat of courage, she moved, slipping through the shadows out of the barn, and into the storm that had begun to swirl once more around the night. Snow whipped her face, wind clawed at her hair, and yet each step felt like liberation, like the shedding of chains she had carried too long. The howl of distant wolves mingled with her own, a song of defiance, of survival, of a power that had been denied for too long. Behind her, the barn seemed smaller, dimmer, insignificant compared to the fire burning within her. She did not look back. She could not. The betrayal had cut too deep, the exposure too complete, the weight of the world too heavy to linger in one place. And yet, in the depths of her chest, beneath the fury, beneath the fear, beneath the raw ache of heartbreak, a single fragile ember glimmered, the knowledge that she would rise again. Stronger, wiser, unbroken. Because those who tried to define her, to control her, to fear her, they had forgotten one truth. She was not merely the Omega they whispered about. She was something older, something untamed, something destined. And in the swirling storm, with snow and fire and night entwined, she vanished from their sight, leaving only the echo of silver flame and the promise of retribution, and the shadow of the Alpha who had dared to believe in her when the world had not. She ran through the storm with a determination that felt almost reckless, but there was no time to hesitate, no room for fear to seep in. Snow whipped at her face, clawed at her clothes, and bit at the exposed skin of her hands, but the cold was nothing compared to the fire roaring in her chest. The barn had been a sanctuary once, a place of fragile hope, but now it was behind her, shrouded in shadows and betrayal. Ahead, the darkness pulsed with danger. The enemy had come, and they had crossed every boundary she had tried to maintain. Innocent wolves, her only companions and guardians in the nights of exile, were trapped in the open, their eyes wide, their growls tense but insufficient against the tide that approached. And somewhere in the heart of the storm, the Alpha's presence lingered like a tether she could not see, a connection that filled her with both longing and fear. Every step she took was a negotiation between instinct and strategy. Her body remembered the shifts she had learned in secret, the transformations she had dared only in isolation, and now they demanded expression, demanded release. She felt the familiar tremor of the silver flame beneath her skin, the pulse of the mark on her wrist, urging her forward, reminding her of a legacy she had once thought was a curse. It was no longer a curse. It was power. And power, she realized, was something no one had the right to take from her. The clearing came into view, the place where the enemy had gathered, where shadows coiled like living smoke, where rival alphas and their minions threatened those she had sworn to protect. The sight made her stomach clench, fear twisting with fury, but she refused to falter. The wolves in her sanctuary were already cornered, their growls rising in pitch as they tried to fend off the unseen threat, but their loyalty alone was not enough. They needed her. They needed the one who carried the fire, the mark, the strength that had always been denied. She drew a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs until her chest ached, until the silver flames stirred, dancing along her arms and illuminating the darkness around her. She let herself feel it. The surge of energy, the power that had been denied, the fire that had been tempered in the crucible of exile and betrayal. It responded to her not as a weapon to fear, but as an extension of her very being. And in that moment she no longer ran. She advanced. Every movement was purposeful, controlled, and yet infused with the raw, untamed energy that had always made her dangerous. The enemy paused, sensing the shift in the air, the change in the atmosphere, as if the world itself had recognized the awakening of something ancient and unstoppable. Shadows recoiled, whispers faltered, and a tremor ran through the earth beneath her feet, subtle but undeniable, the first of many signs that she was no longer just a survivor, she was a force to be reckoned with. She raised her hands, feeling the silver flame respond to her intent, tendrils of light weaving through the storm like living threads, illuminating the night, illuminating the danger, illuminating the truth of what she had become. Her mark pulsed brighter than ever, glowing with an intensity that made the hairs on her arms lift, a living, breathing sigil of power and purpose. The air itself seemed to hum, charged with energy, vibrating with a resonance that made the leaves tremble and the wolves in the clearing growl in recognition. The alpha was there, just beyond the first ring of snow-dusted trees, eyes wide, jaw tight, a mixture of awe and fear flickering across his face. He had known she was strong, that she carried power, but even he could not have anticipated the full manifestation of what had been simmering beneath the surface all these years. Her silver flame was no longer restrained, no longer a flicker of hope or a secret kept in shadows. It was a storm made manifest, and it radiated authority and danger in equal measure. And yet, even amidst the fury, even amidst the surge of raw power, there was control. She moved with precision, each step measured, each motion purposeful. When she shifted, when her form blurred, when the shape of her wolf flickered at the edges of perception, silver fur rippling, eyes glowing, the enemy faltered. They had not expected this, had not anticipated the fusion of human cunning and supernatural strength, had not realized that she could embody both predator and protector simultaneously. A howl split the night, sharp and commanding, and her wolves rallied, circling her like a living wall of fur and teeth, ready to defend the one who had given them freedom, given them sanctuary, given them purpose. And she, in turn, gave them her fire, lending strength, lending direction, lending the power of a legacy that had been denied for too long. The enemy moved in a clumsy wave, shadow beasts coiling, rival alphas stepping forward, attempting to assert dominance, to challenge her claim, to test the truth of her threat. But she was untouchable in that moment. Silver flame erupted from her hands, cascading over the snow in arcs of living light, striking the shadows with a precision born of years of practice and survival. Sparks ignited in the air, freezing mid-flight, dancing like ethereal dancers before dissipating in frost. The storm seemed to respond to her, wind twisting around her in protective eddies, snow swirling into blinding veils that hid her movements and revealed only what she chose to show. She could feel the earth beneath her quiver, small tremors building, resonating with the power she wielded. Trees bent slightly as if acknowledging her presence, as if bowing to the rightful owner of the night. And through it all, the alpha watched, unblinking, every muscle taut, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, to join, to protect, and yet understanding that this was her moment, her claim, her transformation. Words came to her, whispered in her mind, the echo of ancestral guidance, of the power she had feared to embrace. Do not hold back. They do not dictate your worth. You are fire. You are storm. You are not to be sacrificed. She obeyed. The air shimmered, silver flame cascading in waves, silver light burning across her form as her wolf-shifted figure flickered into full manifestation. Every sinew taut, eyes glowing like twin moons in the storm. The shadow beasts recoiled, clawing at the earth, hissing in confusion, in terror, in recognition of a predator they had underestimated. Rival alphas froze, jaws slack, faces pale, for they had never witnessed a power so raw, so undeniable, so intertwined with the being it served. Her movements were fluid, a dance of lethal precision and awe-inspiring grace. She leaped, twisted, shifted, striking shadow after shadow, her silver flame trailing like ribbons of living light. Each strike was calculated, each motion deliberate, and yet imbued with emotion. Anger, fury, defiance, love, protection. Every strike was a declaration. She would not be sacrificed. He would not be controlled. She would not be denied. The alpha moved then, stepping into her periphery, his presence grounding her, giving her the tether to humanity that tempered her rage. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze she saw reflection. Awe, desire, understanding, and a raw, unspoken connection that had deepened over nights of quiet whispers and mutual survival. He did not command, he did not order, he simply observed, a silent witness to the reclaiming of power, to the ascension of someone who had been wronged for far too long. The battle raged, snow and flame colliding in bursts of light and shadow. Every blow she delivered was precise, a calculated force, yet each was imbued with an undercurrent of mercy. She did not destroy recklessly, she did not annihilate without thought, for control was part of her power, understanding part of her gift. She was no longer the exiled Omega. She was a force of nature, a guardian, a storm made flesh. Rival alphas fell back, their confidence shattered, realizing that the rules of dominance they had relied upon were meaningless here. Shadow beasts fled, dissipating into the night, unwilling to challenge the being that wielded fire as naturally as breath. And through it all she stood at the center, silver flame curling around her, eyes blazing, mark glowing, every muscle taut with the exhilaration and terror of total liberation. And yet she was not alone. The alpha remained, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence even through the veil of fire and snow, distant enough that she could still move freely, still wield her power unbound. He had followed, silently, protecting without intruding, watching without questioning, understanding without judgment. The bond between them, forged through trials, trust, and whispered confessions, pulsed now in resonance with her own power, a tether of connection in a world that had tried so hard to sever her from every anchor. A tremor ran through the ground as she shifted fully into her wolf form, silver fur bristling, claws digging into the frost-hardened earth. Her howl rose above the storm, a cry that was part warning, part declaration, part communion with the ancient blood that had always flowed through her veins. The alpha mirrored it, a counterpoint to her cry, a note of acknowledgement, a sign that he understood, that he accepted, that he would follow her through storms and fire alike. Even as the immediate threat fell back, scattering into the darkness, the world around her reacted. Trees glowed faintly where her power had brushed them, ice sparkled with residual silver flame, and the wind itself seemed to bend, carrying the resonance of her liberation across the forest. She had claimed her power, embraced it fully, and in doing so she had changed not only herself but the very environment she inhabited. And yet the night was not finished. A darker, deeper pulse lingered beneath the surface, a tremor that whispered of a threat greater than any she had faced. The alpha watched her, pride and concern intermingling in his expression as he sensed it too. Somewhere beyond the clearing, beyond the forest, beyond the reach of silver flame and loyal wolves, a presence stirred, ancient, calculating, and dangerous. Her eyes narrowed, silver light reflecting off the snow and shadows alike. She had reclaimed herself, she had proven her strength. But she knew the battle was only beginning. The world would test her again. Her enemies would regroup. The prophecy she had glimpsed before was not yet complete. And the storm inside her, though harnessed, still demanded recognition, still demanded mastery, still demanded that she rise not only as survivor, but as the force she was meant to be. She lowered her gaze briefly to the alpha, the tether that had grown between them taut and undeniable. "I am not your sacrifice," she whispered, voice steady despite the storm raging both outside and within. "I am not to be controlled, feared, or denied. And I will not be stopped." The alpha nodded, silent acknowledgement, eyes reflecting both awe and desire, understanding that this moment, the reclaiming of power, the assertion of self, was hers alone, but also theirs together, a bond forged in fire and moonlight, in storm and snow, in trials no words could capture. She stepped forward, silver flame dancing along her fur, shifting back partially to human form, every movement precise, every muscle coiled, ready for what was yet to come. She would face the greater threat. She would confront the forces that lurked in shadow. And she would do so not as the girl who had been cast out, not as the Omega whispered about in fear, but as the force of legacy, power, and destiny that had been waiting all along. And in that charged silence, snow swirling, wind howling, wolves growling, and silver flames spiraling higher, she understood something elemental. Reclaiming her power was only the beginning. The world would respond and she would be ready. She would be unstoppable. She would be fire. She would be storm. She would be everything they had feared. And everything they would never forget. The snow had begun to settle, dusting the ground in silence after the storm of fire and shadow. Silver embers lingered in the air, remnants of the battle she had fought, of the power she had claimed, of the defiance that had erupted from her very core. She stood in the center of the clearing, her breath visible in the cold night, eyes scanning the aftermath with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. The wolves she had protected gathered around her, their forms like shadows and light entwined, a silent chorus of loyalty, of survival, of acknowledgement that she had led them through the impossible and had emerged not broken, not diminished but transformed. Yet victory tasted strange on her tongue. It was not sweet. It was sharp, metallic, threaded with doubt. The enemy had fled for now, but the threat lingered in every corner of the forest, in the whispers of the wind, in the way the trees bent as if holding their breath. Even with her power, even with the fire blazing along her skin, she knew that the world beyond this grove was not hers to command. The pack councils, the rival alphas, the humans who whispered of monsters, they would not forgive, would not understand. They would fear. They would seek to undo what she had fought so hard to claim. And in that fear she felt the loneliness of her path stretch wider than ever. She lowered her gaze to her hands, the faint glow of the silver flame pulsing along her fingertips, a heartbeat of power, of legacy, of potential yet untapped. She remembered the first time it had flared uncontrollably, the shame she had felt, the isolation it had wrought, the rejection that had cut her deeper than any blade could. And now here it was again, a reminder that the very thing that made her feared, that made her hunted, was the same thing that made her unyielding, unstoppable, and undeniably alive. It was both her shield and her curse, her beacon and her shadow, and she could not disentangle one from the other. The alpha stood nearby, slightly apart, his gaze fixed on her with a mixture of awe and concern. He had seen her in full force, had witnessed the silver flame dancing, the ancestral mark glowing, the transformation into something both terrifying and breathtakingly beautiful. And yet he had not moved to claim her victory for himself, had not intruded, had simply been present, grounding, tethering. His presence was both comforting and unnerving, a constant reminder that she was not alone, yet that the path ahead remained hers to walk. She met his eyes, searching for answers, for affirmation, for a sense that someone could truly understand the fire she carried. And in his gaze she saw reflection. Not the reflection of fear, not the reflection of judgment, but the reflection of someone who had glimpsed the depth of her being and chosen to remain, chosen to witness, chosen to stand even in the face of storms. Her chest tightened at the thought, a thrill and a warning intertwined, reminding her that connection carried both warmth and risk. The forest was quiet now, but the silence was heavy, loaded with the weight of choices yet to be made. She could feel it in the air, the tension of futures unformed, the pull of destinies that had not yet crossed, the whisper of prophecies that had begun to stir in earnest. She was powerful, yes, but power alone did not guarantee acceptance, did not guarantee safety, did not guarantee that the world would bend to her will. She had claimed her strength, but the battle for trust, for understanding, for belonging was far from over. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did when the adrenaline ebbed, to the question that had haunted her since exile. Would anyone ever truly stand by her? Would anyone choose her with all her fire, all her danger, all her complexity? Or would they recoil, fear her, cast her out once more? She could see it so clearly now, the duality of the world's gaze. Some would see her as a savior, a leader, a force of destiny. Others would see her as a threat, a monster, a harbinger of ruin. And the knowledge cut sharper than any wound. No one could decide that for her. She had to claim it herself. She lifted her head, eyes scanning the horizon where shadows still lingered, where the night seemed to breathe with latent threat, and a shiver ran through her, not of cold but of awareness. The world had not yet accepted her, but that did not mean it would not. And perhaps in that tension, in that precarious balance between fear and awe, she had found her greatest power: choice. Choice to stand. Choice to fight. Choice to define herself not by the judgments of others, but by the fire within. The alpha shifted slightly, his presence a subtle anchor, a steadying force in the midst of uncertainty. He did not speak, not yet, giving her space to gather herself, to embrace the gravity of her position. And in that silence she felt the pull of something intimate, something electric, something that transcended words. The connection between them was unspoken yet undeniable, threaded through glances, through shared danger, through understanding forged in fire and storm. And then, as the wind carried a faint echo of distant howls, warnings perhaps, or merely the restless call of creatures drawn to her awakening, she realized that the world outside this grove, outside this night, was waiting. Waiting to see what she would do next. Waiting to see whether she would stand, whether she would falter, whether she would succumb to the fear that had haunted her for so long. Waiting to see if she could claim not just power but destiny with all its risks and burdens. She exhaled, the silver flame pulsing one last time in acknowledgement, in promise, in defiance. "I am not your sacrifice," she whispered again, this time louder, carrying it into the night, letting the wind bear the words, letting the storm carry the conviction. "I am fire. I am storm. I am everything you fear, and everything you could never contain. And in that declaration she felt something shift in the air around her. Not fear, not submission, but possibility. A moment suspended in time, a heartbeat stretched across eternity, a question left hanging in the cold night air, as tangible and piercing as frost on bare skin. Who will stand with her? Who will fear her? Who will recognize the force she has become, and who will retreat into shadow? Her gaze found the viewer, if only in thought, if only in the silent connection that the story demanded. And the question lingered, haunting, lyrical, almost a whisper of destiny carried on the wind. Would you have chosen her, or feared her too? Could anyone see past the fire, past the danger, past the storm, to the essence of the being who had fought, suffered, survived, and now stood fully, defiantly, unshakably herself? The wolves stirred around her, a gentle ripple of movement, of loyalty, of recognition. The alpha's gaze never wavered, steady and unwavering, a mirror of the choice one could make: to stand, to protect, to witness, to believe. And yet, even in that quiet tableau, the tension remained. The world still hostile, the future unformed, the threat of betrayal or misjudgment lurking just beyond the reach of the clearing. She lifted her hand, the silver flame dimming slightly, pulsing like a heartbeat, like a promise. And in that gesture she extended the invitation, the challenge, the call. Will you stand with her in the fire and the storm, in the uncertainty and the awe? Will you choose her side, or turn away as so many had before? And then, as the night deepened and shadows stretched long across the snow, the final words slipped into the wind, intimate, compelling, almost a confession to every soul listening. If this story lit a fire in your soul, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections. Here tales burn and hearts beat with destiny. Here you will witness the impossible, the extraordinary, the love and the power that refuses to be denied. Will you stand by her? Or will you let her fight alone? The clearing fell into silence again, yet the echo of the question lingered, reverberating against the trees, the snow, the very heartbeat of the forest. Every choice, every ally, every glance and whisper of loyalty or fear now mattered. The storm had passed, the flames had dimmed, but the story of fire and frost, of exile and power, of love and destiny, was only just beginning. And the heroine, radiant in silver flame and unyielding in purpose, waited, poised at the precipice of everything that could come, daring the world and the viewer to choose. And in that suspended moment the night held its breath. Would you have chosen her, or feared her too? The clearing was quiet now, almost impossibly so. The snow had melted into the frozen ground in patches, steam rising where her silver flame had scorched the earth. The battle was over, at least for tonight, but the forest itself seemed to hum with lingering energy, a pulse that spoke of unfinished business, of destinies still weaving themselves in the shadows. She moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured, the frost crunching beneath her boots like the echoes of the storm that had passed. Behind her, the alpha followed, his presence steady, grounding, a tether in a world that had shown her nothing but chaos for so long. The wolves followed too, silent and watchful, their fur bristling with the faint static of residual magic, their eyes glowing in the dim light, reflecting a loyalty that had been earned through fire, through survival, through shared danger. They moved as one with her, guardians and companions, the only family she had truly chosen, or that had chosen her, outside the chains of her exile and rejection. Each step through the grove, each breath of the cold night air, reinforced the bond she felt to them, to the alpha, and to the fragile possibility that even in a world that feared her she could find her place. Her mind wandered to the night sky, where the moon, half hidden behind ragged clouds, cast a pale, ghostly light over the landscape. Stars flickered in and out, as though uncertain whether to witness what had transpired, or to look away in fear of her power. And in that quiet, in the tenuous lull after chaos, she felt the weight of the world pressing lightly, insistent yet patient, reminding her that survival alone was not enough. She had claimed her strength, but the true test, of purpose, of destiny, of leadership, had yet to come. The ground trembled beneath her boots. At first it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a vibration through the soles of her feet, a quiver in the frozen soil. She froze, senses sharpening, every nerve alight. The alpha's gaze flicked toward the horizon, eyes narrowing, muscles tensing, his body a taut wire of anticipation. Around them the wolves stiffened, ears pricked, tails low but rigid, instinctively aware that the calm was only temporary. From the shadows at the edge of the grove, a faint glow emerged, soft at first, almost teasing, and then intensifying into something unnatural, something that hinted at intelligence and intent. It danced along the trees, pulsing like a heartbeat, too deliberate to be mere residual magic. She felt it in her chest, a prickle along her skin, a shiver down her spine, the whisper of destiny growing louder. Not all threats were gone. Not all enemies had been revealed. She turned her head, the wind carrying faint, almost inaudible murmurs. The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old. It was something older, something ancient, resonating with power she did not yet fully understand. She is not the only one. The words were carried across the frozen clearing, curling around her like smoke, leaving an icy trail of forewarning. Her pulse quickened, not with fear alone, but with the tense exhilaration of a challenge she could neither ignore nor run from. The alpha stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on the small of her back, grounding her in the moment, even as the tremors beneath their feet hinted at forces that neither of them had yet confronted. His voice, low and steady, barely audible over the whispering wind, reached her ears. Whatever comes, we face it together. There was certainty there, but also caution, a tacit acknowledgement that the world was vast and unpredictable, and that her journey, her trials were far from complete. She glanced at him, reading the mixture of awe and concern, and realized that the connection between them had deepened beyond shared danger. It had become something more fragile, more dangerous, more profoundly human. Trust had begun to root itself in her heart, delicate as a snowflake poised on a branch, but fierce in its insistence. And yet she could not ignore the foreboding energy that radiated from the glow at the forest's edge, the silent murmurs from shadows that had not yet been illuminated. Her thoughts flickered briefly to her pack, to the councils that had condemned her, to the exiles that had tried to break her spirit, and she felt a surge of defiance. No longer would she be shaped solely by the fear of others. No longer would she be dictated to by ancient laws that could not contain the fire in her blood. She had claimed her power once, and she would claim it again, and again, until the world either accepted her or learned the cost of denying her. A low rumble rolled through the grove, subtle at first and then sharper, more insistent, like the growl of some colossal beast stirring beneath the earth. The trees shivered, shadows stretching unnaturally, bending toward the light of the moon and the silver flame that still lingered faintly along her skin. The sensation was intoxicating, thrilling, terrifying. She could feel the pulse of the unseen forces, the energy of destinies colliding, and she knew in the marrow of her bones that this was only the beginning. The wolves stirred again, forming a protective ring around her and the alpha. Their eyes, glowing with feral intelligence, shifted between her and the unseen threat, acknowledging her command without words. She had become more than a survivor, more than a fugitive, more than an exile with a dangerous gift. She had become a force, a beacon, a nexus of ancient power and emerging destiny. And the forest itself seemed to recognize it, trembling under the weight of possibility, of prophecy, of a story that refused to end. From deeper in the shadows, another whisper floated, indistinct, but laden with intent. The true alpha hasn't risen, yet. The words coiled around her heart like icy tendrils, stirring fear, curiosity, and an undeniable pull toward the unknown. She inhaled sharply, chest tightening, senses flaring, and she knew that the path ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. Not only her strength, but her choices, her alliances, her very understanding of who she was and what she could become. The alpha's hand remained steady on her back, a silent promise, a shared acknowledgement that they were inextricably linked now. They walked slowly, the snow crunching beneath them, the forest watching, the shadows breathing with secrets yet to be revealed. Every step was deliberate, measured, weighted with the knowledge that the calm before them was temporary, that danger and destiny were woven together in ways that would challenge them both, and that the story was far from over. She glanced back once, toward the clearing where the echoes of battle had faded, where silver flames still left faint trails along frozen branches. It was a reminder of what she had accomplished, yes, but also a stark warning. The world would not wait for her to rest. Threats lingered, rivals schemed, forces unseen plotted, and ancient prophecies still whispered their riddles. Every choice, every step, every heartbeat mattered now more than ever. The wind stirred faintly, carrying with it the scent of danger and the memory of the storm. The glow in the shadows flared again, more insistent, almost alive, as though the forest itself was aware of the approaching challenge, aware that she and the Alpha were not merely walking into the night, but into the cusp of something monumental, something that could redefine power, love, and survival itself. She raised her head toward the moon, letting the pale light fall across her features, silver flame faintly tracing along her wrist. The air was electric, charged with possibility, and she felt the tension of unseen forces pressing gently against her chest. She could feel destiny whispering, coaxing, daring her to step fully into the role she had only begun to understand. The Omega who would lead, the child of fire and exile, the one whose choices would echo far beyond the forest, beyond the night, beyond the storm she had already survived. The Alpha matched her gaze with his own, unwavering, steady, magnetic, a tether in a world that had proven itself unpredictable and often cruel. He did not speak, he did not need to. His presence alone conveyed a promise, a challenge, a shared burden. Together they moved forward, leaving the clearing behind, leaving the immediate danger behind, but stepping knowingly into the unknown, into a night thick with possibilities and perils, into a future that would demand everything they had to give and more. And from the deepest shadows, a voice lingered, haunting, prophetic, a whisper carried on wind and frost alike. She is not alone. And she is not finished. The story has only begun. The snow drifted gently over the frozen ground, the forest held its breath, and the wolves walked beside her, silent and loyal, guardians of the moment, witnesses to destiny in motion. The world was still waiting. The enemies were still watching. The challenges had not ceased. And she, radiant in silver flame, unyielding in spirit and bound by trust and defiance alike, walked into the future aware, unbroken, and unstoppable. The scene faded slowly, as if the night itself was drawing a curtain over a stage still trembling with tension. The whisper of prophecy lingered, and the faint pulse of danger hummed just beyond perception, a promise to return, a call to the next chapter, a reason to watch, to listen, to live alongside her as the story unfolded. And somewhere in the darkness, another heartbeat echoed hers, a silent, unbroken question to every soul who had followed the journey thus far. Will you be there when the storm rises again? Will you walk beside her, or turn away into shadow? The forest sighed. The glow dimmed but did not vanish. The Alpha remained at her side. The wolves, the snow, the echoes of flame, all waited. And the story, radiant with fire and suspense, whispered through the night. This isn't over. Not by far. Not yet.